Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's Elephant in the Room. And today we're going to tackle a question that was given to us by a viewer last week. They asked about diversity, and that is a wide sweeping topic. It can be a delicate topic. It's often a politically correct topic. But I think today what I want to try and do is dig really deep, get really real, get really raw, and talk truth. So let's dive right in with diversity. And Jaco, I'm curious, from your view over in the Netherlands, what's working, what's not working, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Where do you think things need to go through your lens?
Yeah, throw it right at me, Mike.
Hot seat.
Yeah, I think this is a topic a lot of people are or could be quite uncomfortable with.
Yep.
Because one easily and almost inevitably end up talking about discrimination in one or other form, or labeling with all the associated consequences. But you mentioned South Africa. I think I'm fairly comfortable with this topic, being born and raised in apartheid South Africa, which at the time when I was a child was pretty much at the opposite end of the spectrum, dominated by a white male society. And I think one could argue that this stemmed from ignorance or arrogance or racism, but it excluded most forms of diversity, be it ethnic or religion. It was very homogeneous, and then I moved to the Netherlands, which is in a certain sense, I think, more developed in terms of a collaborative multicultural society. But even now, anno 2020, I see that in the Netherlands, but also Europe, for that matter, we still struggle to get a better balance in governmental institutions and in companies. So this is a real struggle. These days, I think it focused very much on gender, which is a good thing, although I believe it distracts from the broader discussion on cultural background and demographics. I just want to make sure if you guys can see me, because my computer just went black.
We can still see.
We've got you, Jaco.
Oh, you can see me. Oh, okay, that's fantastic. So, yes, please go, Mike.
Yeah, I think you bring up, some good points. And I think, the biggest issue with diversity in my mind is trying to pigeonhole it, right? I mean, are we talking ethnicity? Are we talking age? Are we talking gender? Are we talking experience? I mean, they're, philosophically diverse, positionally diverse, organizationally diverse. I mean, there's so many ways to skin the proverbial cat here. And I think really in my mind, diversity is all about going against human nature, which is trying to surround yourself with people just like you, right? Because we're all comfortable in whatever our bubble is. And so when you actually kind of celebrate the uniqueness, right, of the individual and what their differences are and how they enrich you and your universe and your environment and your culture, that's when things get really fun. But it's a difficult thing for a lot of people to naturally do because we're just not wired like that. I mean, Shaina, what do you think?
Yeah, actually, I was going to bring up how our brains are actually wired to simplify information that we are constantly absorbing, right? Like our subconscious part of our brain is trying to categorize all this information that we're learning through like these kinds of interactions or whatever. And a way to do that is actually like basically stereotyping, like the ways or the things that we think about people without knowing them, without ever having talking to them. Those stereotypes basically are actually your brain's way of categorizing information that you've consumed in other ways. Like if you live in a pretty like white community and the only interaction that you have with the Black community is through movies or music or something, you get a very two-dimensional view of what the Black community is. And I'm sure Roo can speak to that better than I can, but like I just think that like our brain, we have to be aware that our brains are doing this, because we have to acknowledge that we have unconscious bias, and then you have to work against that, right? Exactly what you were saying, Mike. You have to actually go against your human nature to find people that look like you and feel and like talk like you, to actually interact with people that don't.
I want to learn to talk like Roo. He has such a cool accent. I want to pick that up. But
well, I think Roo, the mush of accents, and I think I have a unique perspectives, because I feel like I grew up in Dominican Republic, raised in New York, lived in Philadelphia, all very different communities. So I've always been around by very different people. So to me, that the concept of diversity, at least as it is framed in the United States, is very different than what I had in my mind. Like the concept of race was switched to me when I moved to the US. It was a completely new idea in the way that everybody was put in a different box. And I'm not saying that it didn't exist back in the Dominican Republic, but it was very, very different, because I think in DR we come in every color of the rainbow, and it's just normal. Like my sister's blonde, and so it's kind of like an interesting dynamic that I grew up with. So coming here was different. So to me, this was always the norm. It's like, oh, everybody's different. Everybody can look a little different, and everybody can act a little different. But the one thing that's catching my attention is in some of the comments, people keep highlighting diversity of thought. And I think that's a great point, because I think sometimes we overlook that by wanting to check other boxes. And I think that's where the strength, especially if we take it to the corporate world or a company or an organization, I think that's where the strength of the organization can really thrive. Because by default, if we focus on diversity of thought, you're going to end up bringing people from many different backgrounds, many different demographics. Because I know I bring a whole different perspective than Myatt does, than Shaina does. Yeah. And just by labeling thought, I think it's a simpler way, without necessarily going into each individual boxes or checking them off as we go. I don't know. What are you guys' thought?
I actually think it's the opposite, Roo. I think it's harder to identify whether or not you truly achieve diversity of thought, because it's simpler, right? To be like, well, you're a woman, so you have a different way of thinking than I do, right? Like,
you can't see,
exactly. It's like, how do you know you've achieved diversity of thought if you're just basically like opening the door to anybody who thinks differently than you? It's like not really a quantifiable thing, right?
Well, it kind of manifests itself in real time, though. If everybody in the room is nodding their head the same direction, if we're all agreeing with one another, that's kind of unanimity of opinion, right? Unanimity of thought. And I think, what's interesting is when you get in a room with 4 people and you're really poking and probing at things, because you're exploring unique perspectives and difference of opinion and diversity of opinion. And, I think, like all of you, I had an interesting upbringing as well, because, I grew up in the 60s, right? I mean, I was right smack dab in the middle of busing, and the impact that, segregation and non-segregation had on my world as a young boy growing up. I mean, it's like, oh, this is interesting, and, that sticks with you. But, it's interesting. I don't know. Anytime I get a chance to be around people that are different, I'm kind of drawn to that, because that's where I learn. That's where I grow. That's where I get stretched. That's where I get challenged. That's where I get pushed hard on. I mean, my son and I have had lots of interesting conversations about diversity, because, he ran a nonprofit in the Democratic Republic of Congo for a while, and he lived in inner city St. Louis for a while. And I mean, he placed himself in environments that were naturally different than what he was raised in. And I think, it made him a better human being, a stronger human being, a more critical thinker, a more compassionate thinker. And that's, impacted me, So, I mean, we can all kind of have impacts on one another if we're open to it. But I think that's the key is, are you open to it? And are you willing to take some criticism in regard to the opinions that you hold? Jaco, I'm curious, when it comes to search, what's your reaction when you have a client say, we want a diverse hire? You know, they've immediately taken a universe this big, shrunk it down to here, and say, we want somebody that looks just like this. Is that diverse?
How much time do you have, Mike? How much time do you have?
Yeah. Is that diverse? Is that diverse?
Well,
is it not diverse? Is it interesting? Is it right? Is it wrong? What are your thoughts?
The interesting thing is, this is a very interesting topic, actually, when we think about diversity and companies. I think that's what you're hinting at, is that, to give an example, in the Netherlands, we have signed what's called the Executive Search Code a couple of years ago as End to Growth. So we really support that. And in essence, it means that diversity is a strategic factor for sound decision-making in companies and performance of companies or institutions or the government. So we make diversity a fixed agenda item in the discuss if we discuss leadership with our clients, with companies. And this code is to give you an idea of the importance, is also signed by other top-tier executive search firms like Egon Zehnder, for instance, and Spencer. So in essence, what we do is we commit ourselves as a search company, and we do it because we have a huge impact on the long list and the short list. You know, who's going to be presented to the company, and you want that group to be diverse. So we commit ourselves in the selection process to look at both, let's say in case of gender, to look at masculine and feminine qualities. We strive to have. It's something that's been, it comes from the EU and found its way to local governments to have around about 40% diversified candidates, for instance, in our boards and supervisory boards. So when we as a search firm prepare the long list, and that's the easy part, the short list, it gets more difficult, you know all about it, strive to have at least 40% diversified candidates. And it goes further than that. You know, you really try to coach and support the diversified candidates to prepare them, especially if it's their first time board role or a senior executive role, to prepare them for the interview, because it might just go different than they used to. So there's a lot of things that we do to make sure that the pool of candidates which we present are diverse, and much more diverse than it used to be in the past.
Yeah, so let me comment on that, and then I'm going to poke on that a little bit. So, you know, here's stateside in the U.S. I mean, I think our diversity ratios on candidate pools are actually higher, quite a bit higher. I think they're well in excess of 50%. But, you know, it's interesting to me. So here's my question. Should our mandate be hiring a diverse candidate, the best candidate? Is the diverse candidate the best candidate? I mean, you know, I mean, let's get you know, down and dirty on this. I mean, I know that I feel as more senior white male, I often feel discriminated against in today's world, but I think that's an easy thing to say. But I think there's a large group of people out there that just don't really like people that look like me these days. And so it's interesting, right? I think, but you know, from my perspective, I can get that. You know, I can see it in some regards. In other regards, I kind of struggle with it. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that topic?
Responding to that comment, I think honestly, like, that's how a lot of people in the world feel. I think a lot of people feel discriminated against, or that like groups of other people that look differently than them just like write them off, you know, and maybe for the first time as like an older white male, you're experiencing with what people like gay people like me, Black people like Roo, have been experiencing basically. And I think not that that's a great thing to experience, but I hope it generates more empathy,
I think it should, and that's where I wanted to go. Right, that's what I was calling out. Is I think all of us feel that way at times, because all of us have experienced that at times. Now, certain people to differing degrees, right? Clearly, certain people to greater adverse impact, clearly. I mean, honestly, when I look at my world, I can't say that discrimination impacts me a whole lot, right? I mean, I can see how it could mentally if I allowed it, but in reality, it doesn't. But it impacts other people every single day,
right?
And so I think that's the question, right? Is how do we actually become more compassionate, more empathetic, but keep things in balance so we don't lean too far one way or the other, or is there too far one way or the other?
Let me give you some good news, Mike. If ever you need to apply for a job again in the future, the interesting thing is that it's been proven that diverse groups make better decisions.
Yeah.
If you look at the average, let's say an average team would be about 66% spot on, they in their decision-making process. If you take a homogenous group, let's say all male or all female, it would be around about 58%. Now, if you add gender diversity, you go up to around about 68%. And now we get to your comment. If you mix it up a bit with age, so you have age and gender diversity, it goes up to 80%. And then I've seen I think it was Evie who made a comment on geography. If you get the complete mix right, so you look at gender diversity, age, at geographical diversity, you can go up to 87%. So it means, in essence, if you make it real simple, that diverse groups have a higher IQ and possibly even an EQ than non-diverse groups.
Yeah, I think this is one of the few cases where numbers don't lie. I think, I think, look, our organization is substantially better in terms, regardless of what lens you look through, the more diverse we get, I think the better we become, the more unique we become, the more productive we become. I've watched that occur, over the history of this organization, and I see it occur for our clients. So that's the interesting thing is, I think the debate wanders off course every now and then because the numbers are what the numbers are, right?
Well, the interesting thing is we talk about gender diversity. I work for various companies. We work for various companies, but also in healthcare. Now, in general, there's a lot of companies who really need to get their statistics right. They need to be more diverse, and especially, if we look at all the different factors that we just discussed, especially women in boards and in supervisory boards. But you also have certain companies where it's the other way around. If you look at healthcare, for instance, they need more men to diversify. Education, the same thing. I mean, my son went to school. There was barely a male teacher in the school, and that also has an impact on the group.
Yeah.
I just read one of the comments, the live comments, and the person was basically saying like trying to be discrimination-less may lead to diversity, but I think like we have to think about what the opposite of discrimination is, which is basically like celebration, celebrating the differences, celebrating the things that people bring to the table that are different. And basically like welcoming the whole person and not just like what they're capable of doing or like the experiences they have, whether it was a certain degree or whatever. Like, I think we have to get to the point where instead of discriminating against these kinds of things, like to discern, okay, who is the best candidate for this job? You're evaluating what is good about this person, and it includes the diverse parts of themselves, and it includes, it's like almost like the diverse part of them is a given. Like diversity has to be there basically in order to be the best candidate in this day and age, I feel.
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, I preach this all the time around here. I continually tell our team that we don't sling resumes for a living, right? We present insights, guidance, and counsel, and we do that most appropriately through evaluating the entirety of the human being, right? The whole human, not just their job, not just their career trajectory, not just the things that jump off the resume, but who are they as an entire whole human being? And that includes diversity, period, end of sentence. So I think, Shaina, that's spot on. I mean, Roo, what do you think?
Well, I was going to point out, it's funny even to see this dynamic. And I think we can even point this out, maybe it's an example. How many CEOs or chairmen will literally take the liberty to go live, and literally I can say it 30 seconds before we hit the live button today, Mike, was, you have no bumpers to take this discussion in any directions that it needs to go. To be honest, I can't think of many that will be willing to do that and put themselves in a position where you may not be PC, especially in this type of conversation. Yeah. And I think this is a great example of, if we have more of this in the workplace and accept different opinions and accept different thoughts, is the best way to get to know one another and empower one another to share who we are.
Yeah, I think that's the real trick, right? You can't know somebody if you're not willing to talk about things that are uncomfortable. I mean, if all you're getting is a piece of somebody, you don't know them, and they're not ever really going to get to know you. So to really explore the boundaries of a relationship, you have to be honest. And look, I'm sure that by the time we're done here today, I will have said a half a dozen things that I probably will scratch my head after the fact and go, did I really see that? But I think that, but that's how this is supposed to work, right? We're not supposed to be perfect. We're supposed to be human. And I think that's the big thing.
Well, to add to your comment, Ro, we talk a lot about diversity, and we've defined it a little bit. We looked at gender and ethnicity, but I think it shouldn't be a means to an end. Diversity, it is, it's also about inclusion. It's about being creating an environment in a company where the being different is valued. And where you can develop that differentness, and where it adds value to the organization. So it's not, and I think you're right, Mike. I like numbers, but I even like more the fact that you put the numbers aside and discuss what's really going on inside a company, and how you can get people to really get involved and respect and connect and mine that richness of diversity to the benefit of the group.
Yeah. Well, let's step back and look at what we do for a second, right? We're in the talent business. So if we all look the same, our vetting process, our diligence process, if we all grew up the same way, got educated at the same institutions, had the same backgrounds and experiences, we can't fully vet a candidate if we're intellectually honest, right? I mean, it's the diversity of our backgrounds and experiences that allow us to get a different lens on somebody and view things a certain way for the benefit of our clients. So, like, if you look at our team, we've got people in here on our team that have military backgrounds, Peace Corps backgrounds. We've got Ivy League, members from the Ivy League. We have people that don't have college degrees. We have a little bit of everything. And as weird as it sounds, we shouldn't be able to agree on anything, at face value, but we do. And what we agree on is intellectual honesty, right? And I think that is what really benefits our clients and our process, is that we're willing to kind of take the gloves off and dig deep on things and provide interesting thoughts. And that's what makes the process work here, but it's also what makes the people work here. I mean, does that make sense?
It does, and there's also another type of diversity. I'm coming back to the healthcare sector. So what you want to do as a company is, in diversifying, you also want to have different influences enriching your environment.
Yeah.
Now it's really tricky. If you, for instance, you're the managing director of a hospital, and you want to, it's a non-profit organization, and these days it's inclined to become more profit. So you also want to enrich your company with people who knows how a profit organization works. Yeah. Now, the first thing the supervisory board will tell you is, bring us really interesting candidates, not more of the same. We want somebody that's going to challenge us, that's bringing new things to our company, new way of thinking. And then you present the candidates, and what is the first thing they say? Oh, he doesn't understand our business, or she doesn't understand our business. So it's also our task, I think, the task of executive search firms or leadership firms to really challenge clients about their vision of diversity within the company and help them to make the steps.
Yeah, it's the team you want versus the team you need, right? And I think a lot of times what we want is not what we need. And so, that's a key part of our job, but it's a key part of every leader's job, is to challenge their organizational construct, their culture, to really figure out how to improve things for the benefit of the greater good, right? Because if you look at your workforce as a population base, you want to consistently enrich that population base, right?
Yep.
Hey, Shaina, you want to field this question? I guess it's more of a statement than a question, but.
Yeah, if we are all the same, then that means some of us are not necessary. I mean, possibly. I mean, I think it totally depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? It's like some organizations just need a lot of people to get the work done, and then others need like the diversity of thought to come up with creative solutions and things like that. So I think it's highly dependent on the context. But I was actually going to ask you all what you think when we're talking to our clients and they say diversity hire. What are the elements or like parts of a person do you think that they're actually referring to? Because I think there's, like we said at the beginning call, there's a lot of different parts of a person and a different way to look at diversity. So like, what are the actual things that the clients are pointing to when they say a diversity hire?
I think it really depends on the client, right? If you've got a switched on client that thinks about the whole human, that statement takes on a different form. If you've got kind of a legacy-based HR thinker that's just checking the box on diversity segments, different story. If it's about optics more than anything else, different story. So I think it really depends on the situation, but I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And when you get a client that asks for the right things for the wrong reasons, that's where we can really add value, right? And you have to be, you have to be sensitive as to how you unpack that with a client, but it's our obligation to do that. Now, if they tell us to pound sand, not much we can do, right? But I think that is our obligation, to have authentic, transparent conversations with people. That's what they hire us for. And I think, if leadership teams at all organizations were willing to ask themselves, why does this matter to us? What are we looking for? What are we trying to improve? What are we trying to solve? They can have real conversations rather than just, looking at a picture or something, right? I mean, there are different levels of thought that go into this. Jaco, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I think, good point, Mike. I'll refer to what I see in the Netherlands or maybe in Europe at large. Is the focus at this stage is very much on gender. So people say diversity, but they mean gender, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, actually. But I do believe that it distracts a little bit from the broader discussion on cultural background, on demographics, on language, ethnicity, religion. It's a very broad discussion. So we need to tackle, obviously, maybe the most obvious attributes or aspects of diversity, which is gender at the moment. But I also look at companies. Obviously, we play a big role in positioning candidates. But if I may quote a lady I got to know, Marguerite Soetomarijnen. She's one of the top executives of Aon, and she's also the chairman of the what's called Top Vrouwen, which is an organization that really campaigns for diversity, or then also gender diversity in executive positions. She says, she looks at companies and she basically sees two groups of companies with respect to diversity. Those who play not to lose, and we know them, and those who play to win. And I really like this analogy of hers. So the group of companies who play not to lose, they reactive, they defensive, they change because they feel the heat, the external pressure, maybe from shareholders, but they don't really make the real changes in the company culture and the strategy of the organization. And then you have, and I think they're the laggards, they either never going to get there or it takes a really long time. And then you have a group of companies who play to win, who are, it's integral part of their strategy that they look at to diversify, they develop talent, they have a good talent development program, and they do not just go for the once-off, they go for a good batting average, not just the once-off diversified candidate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a mindset thing, right? But I've always believed that if you're evaluating talent properly, diversity happens naturally. Because what you're looking for is you're looking for that whole human being, right? So I'm interested to know if you've traveled the world. I'm interested to know what neighborhood you grew up in. I'm interested to know all kinds of things about you, because that's what makes you interesting. I mean, if I look at Roo, I can see that his pigmentation is darker than mine. We don't need to have a whole lot of conversation about that, right? I mean, maybe I can get a better tan. I don't know, but I think, look, I mean, here's the bottom line. I can see that difference. I want to know everything I can about you in terms of what makes you a unique human being, right? And that's how you build a really diverse team. I could probably find a lot of people that think exactly like I do, that maybe have are of a different gender or a different race or a different sexual preference, but they think exactly like I do. Yeah. That's not necessarily diversity, right? So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I have a bit of a different take on that, Mike. I think that diversity doesn't come naturally often. That's the whole issue. Because it doesn't naturally, it doesn't always
the human nature thing we talked about earlier.
Yes, it's birds of the same feathers flock together. Yeah. So I think it needs. There's some instances it needs to be stimulated. It really needs to.
Well, the qualification that I gave earlier was if you're doing it right, and I think that's the thing is, do most people do it right, or do they just do what they do? Yeah. I mean, what's been your experience, Shaina? I mean, do you think people are more or less getting it or not? I mean, what are you seeing out there?
I think it definitely depends on the intentional efforts being put into incorporate this into the way of thinking in the military. Like, there was a big push to, I mean, they've always, or maybe not always, but they have observance months where it's like February is Black History, June is Pride Month, I think March is Women's History. But so like they have these observances to like set literally times on the calendar to observe that there are like diverse groups within the military. And I actually ran the first Pride Month celebration at my first base because it was brand new that year. the first year that I was there, I believe. And I had so many questions about why are we celebrating this? Like, this is against my religion, like all these different comments from people that really basically drove it home for me, the need to have that kind of thing, because what it was doing was generating the conversation around it. You know, so many people are just like not even willing to talk about it. Yeah. And I think that's why we're having this conversation today, right? Yeah. It's like an elephant in the room kind of thing. Yeah. And I do think that like, since, I mean, that was back in 2012, I think. And from then till now, I have seen a difference. It's not exactly where I want it to be. Yeah. But I'm like pretty progressive. So I think like my desire for society might be different from a lot of people. But what I do think is that like when it comes to mentorship and development, and Jaco, you were getting at training development within large companies, it needs to be something that is like acknowledged, right? We need to acknowledge that it's natural for us to mentor people that we are comfortable around. And that tends to be people that we look like and people that come from similar places. Like, it's so common for people to be like, oh, I went to that school too, and now they're bros, you know? Yeah. And so we have to work against that basically if we truly want to be diverse, and that takes time and effort. How many people are willing to put in the time and effort to make sure that they're part of a diverse group?
Hey, you know, I'm curious. What do you think? What do the three of you think that we can do better as a firm? You know, I mean, I think we lean into this. I think, you know, it matters to us. You know, I think we really look for the uniqueness of the individual here. But what could we do better, and how could we make this a better culture? I mean, any thoughts, any observations?
Yeah, it's a very sensitive point, Mike. I look at my team in Myatt, and I think, geez, you know, we just not really representative. I mean, we talk about diversity all the time, but I find it really tricky to diversify my own team. I mean, geographically, we have a great spread. Culturally, we have a great spread. But if I look, for instance, at the gender or even the age spread, we have a long way to go. So, Shaina, I'm also looking at you and Roo. Tips welcome, but I do find it it's a difficult cat to skin.
Yeah, we had to be really intentional here. I mean, we made a conscious decision to get younger and to get more diverse, because what did I want? Diversity of thought and experience. I wanted more pushback. I wanted more challenge. I wanted to be stretched, you know, and it was a very intentional decision not to continue to surround myself with people just like me. You know, but you know, that's a good jumping off point, but that's not the destination, right? So, you know, Roo, Shaina, thoughts. What can we be better at? What can we do differently?
I'll start with something that I think we do well, which is basically we talk about this even at like the lowest levels of this organization. I know that we're like pretty flat to begin with, but like it's something that when we're talking about hiring, we're acknowledging like we need more women leaders. We need more people that aren't from the military, because we kind of like skewed in that direction. Yeah. And so it's just like having the conversation that will keep it front of mind, basically, when we're actually going to market to look for talent to join our organization. And honestly, I don't know what we can do outside of that. Like just trying to be intentional and actually walk the walk when it comes to making diverse hires, but like acknowledging what diversity looks like for us, you know, because it's going to be different depending on the group.
Yeah. So the reason I asked that question is I want to give other people kind of permission space to have conversations like this with their team, right? Mm-hmm. To be live on a video and just to, you know, say, hey, what can we do better? Because I think, you know, that's the right question for somebody in my chair to ask. You know, Roo, you popped back online. You got a thought? Lost him. Hey, Roo, we don't have audio.
Hello.
Yeah, there you are.
Oh, perfect. No, what I wanted to share, what I think is interesting, and the first step is acknowledging that is needed. Don't do it
Yeah.
just to check off the box. And if I had to give feedback, I think that's something that we've done really, really well. And sometimes those are things that we overlook and we don't acknowledge them. It's like, at least at Enter Growth, and I've been here long enough to kind of see that transition as we've done it as a team. So it's good to see the effort that was put in, and then the time that it took to say, we need to focus on this in a way that is natural to the form of the company. And it was good to see, because we didn't just hire people to check off the boxes. Oh, cool, we got a new woman, or we got someone that's not in the military. But rather, let's find the right fit, the right person. And if they happen to be diverse, perfect, because we know that we need to diversify as a team and as a unit. And I think that's what's made us really, really strong. And I think something that I also want to acknowledge is the fact that we tend to be pretty flat as an organization. And I think that allows us to have many people sitting at the table. So you get to have many tough conversations and see many different ideas that sometimes when you have more of a traditional kind of structure to an organization, your table may only be 3 or 4 people. And those 3 or 4 people you probably talked to for the last 5 years, every week, every Monday. So the conversations probably are not even that interesting. You probably don't push each other's buttons anymore. And I think that's part of that formula that's gotten us to the point that we are now.
Yeah. Well,
I think
go ahead, Shaina.
Sorry, I was just going to say a key thing, like a very tactical level, like I guess strategy to actually get the communication flowing is like people will literally ask for your opinion here. Like, I don't know how many times I've been on a call and I'm like, okay, I think I'm following this conversation. Someone will be like, Shaina, what do you think? And I'm like, well, this is what I understand of the conversation, you know? And so it's like, you don't have room, or I guess like you're given the opportunity to share what you think. And I think that is really crucial, because so many times I've been in so many rooms where I was literally not sitting at the table. I was sitting off to the side and I was not given any opportunity to speak. You know, I was just there to absorb what was happening. And I mean, there's a time and a place for that, of course. But I think that if you truly want diverse communication happening at your company, you have to ask people for their opinion.
Yeah, it's about the numbers. I hope that my wife is listening, actually, and then she can send a private chat to give me the real statistic. But she mentioned yesterday that you have to have, if you look at a group of people or a board, she's also in the supervisory board of an organization. So she mentioned that you have to have, I think statistically it's about at least 34% to have a real impact or a real vote. And you know, meaning that if you look at the diversity of a group, if a minority has less than, let's say, a 30% representation, it makes no difference. You just don't get through. And that's why we need to make a change in the composition, in the ratios of diversity within leadership, be it boards or supervisory boards.
Well, I think what makes it work around here is that one of the things that we spent a lot of time on, and it wasn't a check the box exercise, right? But it was developing our core values as an organization. So even though we look different, we think differently, we come from different backgrounds, you know, all of those diverse elements exist. There's one commonality here, is that we're aligned around those values. And that's how you really allow, I think, diverse minds and diverse thought to contribute, because we know that we're all focused on the same things, right? And we have that different, unique perspective. Hey, I'm curious, you know, a question that I have, if you could beam into the boardroom of one of our clients and have permission space to talk about diversity unfiltered, you know, what advice would you give them that would be most impactful, that would be most meaningful? I mean, if you had a seat at the table of a, you know, Fortune 50 board meeting, and you were talking about, you know, board composition, workforce composition, what would your advice be to them on the topic of diversity?
I think I would say something like, check yourself. Like, don't be afraid of being policed by somebody else. Like, check your own beliefs, check your own, assumptions you've made about people, and just make sure that you actually are being as open-minded as you think you are, or acknowledge if you're not open-minded, like, I guess get to the root of how you feel about this issue so that you can walk into the boardroom authentically.
And I think that's good to do in all levels of an organization, because I'll put myself in the hot seat. And I know I myself struggled when it comes to age. And like oftentimes, like you will hear this, somebody, especially if somebody's older, they'll bring this idea to something. And at a point in time, I used to dismiss it because I was like, oh, that's an old school way of thinking. Like we're in the 21st century now. Why are we doing things the way that we used to do it in the 90s? And I know that many people in my generation still do that. But that's
you looked at me when you said that, Roo.
No, maybe.
But I think with a certain authority and seniority, and it just puts some weight a lot of the times on what they say. But so looking at companies, I think it's something that one need to tackle from the top and the bottom. But there's another issue, and that is where this diversity discussion really starts. So what I usually do, well, I did it for the second time now because this is our second session together, is I sat down with my daughter, she's 16, and I just talked to her a little bit about how she, the things that she sees and how she thinks the world's going to look like when she's grown up. Hope that's not too soon. But you see, there's, I think that diversity and being sensitive for people having different views than yourself, it starts already at home. It starts by the way that you educate your kids. It continues in the way that kids are educated at school. I'll tell you, if I may, just a short story, and I don't know even if my daughter would know this, but I remember when she was really small, 4 years old, she came home from school, and my wife said, you should ask her, she's got a new friend. Well, it was her first friend. And, I'm telling you the story because I'm from South Africa, where there was this huge issues between black and white people, and obviously I might have a lot of baggage, which I brought with me. And one of the things you want to do as a parent, I think, is not, put that baggage that you've inherited, give it to your children. So I want them to travel light. So I went to my daughter and I said, hey, I've heard that you've got a new boyfriend. She was so sweet. She said, yes, I have. My wife said, you should ask a picture. So I said, well, can you show me a picture? Yeah. And she came and she showed me the picture of this non-European looking guy. And I just saw my father turning around in his grave. And I thought, I was so happy. We did something right. We give our kids. So it's also talking about diversity. It's starting from a very young age. It's not something that you fix by just changing the composition of a boardroom.
Yeah. Jaco, I think that's a great place to end this conversation today. I think, Shaina's comment, check yourself. Jaco's comment, change the future at home, by starting at home. Yeah, and I think, I guess I'll just leave with this thought. I want to have this conversation again in the future. I mean, it's something that we should not stop talking about because we didn't solve anything today, but maybe we shared some information that helps, but, I want to have this conversation again at some point. So with that, hey, Roo, do you want to just close us out with the instructions that you want people to hear in terms of what we want viewers to do?
Yeah, sure. No, let's say thank you to everyone that did stick around and is watching. Please, if you haven't, just give us a like on any of the platforms where you're watching and catch us again next Tuesday.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.